just ready to loose its icy fingers and reach out over the valley below. From the stillness came a gentle swish, like that of a bird alighting, and it seemed as though a slight mist were gathered on the eastern parapet. The mist suddenly took form, and there stood a woman, wondrously beautiful in face and form, with an intense, radiant light about her that we could scarcely look upon. The family startled to their feet and advanced rapidly toward her with outstretched arms, exclaiming, "Mother!" almost as one voice. She stepped lightly down from the parapet to the roof and embraced each embraced each as any mother would, then was introduced to us. She said, "Oh, you are the dear brothers from far-away America that have come to visit us. Our hearts go out to all. We feel that if they would only let us, we would just put our arms out and embrace all as I have embraced thee. These I call mine just now. For we are in reality one family, sons of the one Father, Mother, God. Why can we not all meet as brothers?" We had remarked just before that evening that the evenings were growing chilly, but when this lady appeared, the warmth emitted from her presence made the evening seem like a midsummer. The air seemed laden with the perfume of flowers. A light like that of the full moon seemed to pervade everything, and there was a warmth and a glow over all that I cannot describe. Yet there was no hint of display, just that deep, simple, kindly, childlike way. It was suggested that we go below, and the mother with the other ladies led the way to the stairs, with our party following, and the men of the household bringing up the rear. Then we noticed that, although we seemed to be walking in the usual way, our feet made no sound upon the roof or the stairs. We were not trying to go quietly. In fact, one of our party said he deliberately tried to make a noise and could not. It did not seem as if our feet came in contact with the roof or stairs. We went into a beautifully furnished room. As soon as we entered and were seated, we noticed a warmth and glow, and the room was filled with a soft light that none of us could explain. All maintained a deep silence for a time. The mother asked if we were comfortably located and cared for, and if we were enjoying our trip. The talk led to general everyday subjects, and she seemed familiar with them all. The talk then led to our home life, and the mother gave us the given names of fathers, mothers, sisters, and brothers, and we were surprised at the detailed description of each of our lives that she gave without asking us one question. She told us the countries we had visited, the work we had accomplished, and where we had failed. This was not told in a vague way that we would be obliged to piece together, but every detail stood out as plainly as if we were living the scenes over again. After our friends bade us goodbye, we could but wonder when we realized that not one of them was less than 100 years old, and the mother was over 700 years old, and 600 of that time she had lived on earth with her physical body. Yet all were so buoyant and light-hearted, as though they had been 20, and nothing was assumed. It was as though youthful people were with us. Before they departed that evening, we were told there would be quite an assembly in the lodge the next evening, and that we were invited to be present. Before noon of the next day, all of the parties had arrived. We spent the afternoon in comparing notes, and these notes checked to the letter. That evening, after we had finished with our notes, we were invited to go directly to the lodge for dinner. When we arrived, we found about 300 people, men, women, and children, assembled and seated at long banquet tables. They had reserved places for us at one of the end tables so we could look down the whole length of the room. The tables were all covered with beautiful white linen and set with china and silver plate as for a real banquet. A real banquet. There was but one dim light burning in the hall. After we had been seated for perhaps 20 minutes, there was a deep stillness, and in a moment a pale light flooded the room. The light grew stronger and stronger until all the room was aglow, and everything in the room sparkled as if thousands of incandescent lamps had been cunningly hidden and turned on gradually until all were fully lighted. We were to learn afterwards that there were no electric lights in the village. After the light came on, the stillness lasted for about 15 minutes. Then of a sudden a mist seemed to gather, and there was the same gentle swish, like the sound of wings, that we had heard the evening before when Emil's mother appeared before us. The mist cleared, and standing in the room at different points were Emil's mother and 11 others, 9 men and 3 women. Words fail to describe the radiant beauty of that scene when I say that although they had no wings, they appeared like a troop of angels. I am not exaggerating. They stood for an instant as if transfixed. All bowed their heads and waited. In a moment there came music from unseen voices. I had heard of heavenly voices, but I had never experienced them until that night. We were fairly lifted from our seats. Toward the close, those that had appeared walked to their seats, and we again noticed that, though they made no effort to walk quietly, their feet did not make the slightest noise. When the 12 were seated in their respective places, the same mist appeared again, and when it cleared there stood 12 more. This time there were 11 men and 1 woman, and among these was our friend of the records. As they stood there for a moment, another song burst forth. When the song was nearly ended, the 12 walked to their respective places without the slightest noise. They were no sooner seated than the haze again filled the room. When it had cleared, there were 13 standing, this time across the far end of the hall, 6 men and 7 women, 3 men and 3 women on each side of the woman in the center. The center one appeared to be a beautiful girl in her teens. We had thought every woman that appeared was very beautiful, but this one surpassed them all. They stood with bowed heads for a moment, and the music again burst forth. This music floated out for a moment, then the choir of voices began. We arose to our feet. As the tones rolled on, it seemed as though we could see thousands of mystical forms moving about and singing as with one voice, and through it all there was not one sad refrain, not one minor key. All was joyous, free burst of music that came from the soul and touched the soul, lifting it up and up until we felt as if we were losing all contact with the earth. As the singing ceased, the 13 walked to their respective places and were seated. Our eyes were fairly glued on the central figure as she advanced toward our table, with a lady on either side. She was seated at the head of our table. As she sat down, the plates were quietly stacked at her left hand. The lights grew dim for a moment, and around each one of the 37 there was that same light that so puzzled us, and the most beautiful circle of light just above the head of our honored guest. We were the only ones in that assembly that were greatly moved. Those assembled with us seemed to take it as a matter of course. After all were seated, the silence was maintained for a time. Then every voice in the room burst forth in a glad, free chant, led by the 37 that had appeared. When this was finished, the lady at the head of our table arose and held out her hand. On them appeared a small loaf of bread about 2 inches square and about 14 inches long. Then each one of the other 36 rose, came forward, and received a similar loaf from her hands.